Nyandayami Sanje Chisa Tsoji Chona La Chanju Padu Dani Jes Dagu Chijin Jive Tsonam Ji Androla Benji Sanje Shu Sanje Chisa Tsoji Chona La Chanju Padu Dani Jes Dagu Chijin Jive Tsonam Ji Androla Benji Sanje Drubo Yo Sanje Chisa Tsoji Chona La Chanju Padu Dani Jes Dagu Chijin Jive Tsonam Ji Sanje Drubo Shu Lada Nami Bedam Myoji Ombola Jejela Tsu Chela Chaba Chaba Sanje Sumbara Rishi Dewe Juru Juru Chita Tije Tumbe Chen Dine Dirishi Dewe Jejen Derinje Sayu Dejuba Tenje Cheba Dela Chulu Tejen Kuwa Ye Dewe Labe Nye Jejen Zaime Ambi Dani Leva Tula Tume Sunye Je Namola Ye Kadam Dani Jenkan Tuko Jata Mi Kana Chua Kunji Jana Chizen Batam Je Kedu Da Gui Chu Do Kangi Dona Tenjun Dang Ambi Lendo Tenju Basunja Sumba Meba Ye Sanje Tela Cha Cha Lo O La Sota Nani Kasore Toba Tamje Liba Dinani Shidu Samba Sandan Dembenye Jenga Lola Doji Sambaye Dewa Shiva Namji Chimilu Chene Suwana Shen Chene Tachu Nebi Toma Ani Gunong Cheba Karere Sana Toba Tamje Leva Dinani O Da Seti Nashen Ki Toba Tang Ani Chimi Pinzo Tenye Ki Toba Tang Ani Time Yichi Ki Sambala Sowa Dona Kasore Dede Chatang Mosungo Kine Lamba Mayan Kine Lamba Mayinaya O Tenda Chidi Pinzo Tenye Tang Chimi Pinzo Tenye Tang Ani Da O Rani Jibu Shidi Tenye Kilo O Tende Ki Toba Taje Pa Dune Toba Tamje Leba Dune Nis Shidu Samba Sanda Nembe Ne Se Samba Sambo Ani Chanju Kusana Damba O Chanju Kusana Damba Chidu Chawa Toja Tamje Ji Tendu Ani Toja Lana Bayanda Ba Zobe Sanje Jo Kwamban Toba Teang O Da O Shendun Karara Sana O Shen An Minewe Nyandela Kwebi Chito An Toja Lana Bayanda Ba Zobe Sanje Jo Kwamban Toba Deba Kisam Ginyangure Se O Shidu Samba Sambo Sanda Dembe Yes Jenga Lola Doji Sambana Dora Shivan Ji Chimilu So Ota Nyamba Zam Maise Ane Ti Gina Goraka Ane Niji Jen Sumbo Tende Pa Bane Jenga Kang Nyamba De Ane Tembe Masawa Ane Jenga Ji Wandu Sawa Chishi Yina Ane Tela Dora Shivan Ji Chilu Chugumare Chani Da De Sungo Yambare De Yiza Da Dona Kasoro Chilu Chau 가상 근이 시원한 신체를 다리 다기 단조지 댄서 뭐 렌지 토베 갑디 코일내라 마샤와 마게 섬제던데 코일내나 동아지 동아다 규유 동아다 차완도지 동아 숨지 냠타바 니남 동아 규단 제와라 드라위 치도 아니 터절라는 뭐야다 뭐 저기 산제지 고바는 뭐지 진해지 토바차 어디 치도 아니 어째 장주 남지는 보기 님보 되와 아니 남전 나숨지 셀은 도대 잠시 세냐비 아니 그노 근제 그런 바다 된대시고 하지
No. So, first, to begin with, we should be listening to this teaching on the stages of the path with a good kind of motivation. So, having pacified well all sorts of discursive thoughts, we should listen with a pure, good thought, thinking that we are actually not just going to forget this after we hear it, but put it into practice. So, there is a verse asking for blessings to be able to do this. The first line of the verse is referring to the fact that we should be turning away from the concerns of this life. We should have an attitude which is not attached to the wonders of this life or the wonders, the splendors of samsara in general, but an attitude of renunciation, having pacified those sorts of thoughts that would be attached to the affairs of this life, or even anything within samsara. And not just should we not have a motivation of attachment, hatred, or ignorance, but we should also be not wanting our own peace alone, our own sort of freedom from samsara without having concern for our other sentient beings that are cycling. So not just wanting our own liberation from samsara, the second line then reads, we should have a good kind of pure thought as our motivation for being listening to the teachings. So thinking of the fact that all suffering sentient beings are suffering in this way, we should have an attitude thinking, for the sake of all sentient beings, I want to listen to this Dharma in order that I am able to achieve the state of unexcelled, perfect, complete enlightenment, to be able to benefit them. But so we should be doing this with that kind of a motivation, and when we're listening, we should have abandoned the three faults of a vessel, having a hole in it, or being upside down, or being stained. We should have this attitude that going forward, we are actually going to practice this. We're not just going to hear it and let it become forgotten, or not hold it with mindfulness, but rather we should have an attitude that we're actually going to take this up into practice. So today, at this time, when we have this precious human rebirth, we should think that we are going to make it meaningful, and the way to make it most meaningful is to strive for perfect, complete enlightenment, thinking about all mother sentient beings who are suffering from the three types of suffering: the suffering of change, and the suffering of pervasive conditioned existence. We should wish to be able to free them from all of those sufferings and the causes of sufferings. So for that sake, we're going to listen to this Dharma on the stages of the path in order that we might be able to achieve that state of unexcelled perfect enlightenment for the purpose of all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, that 가장 그 신념들은 마시잖아. 다 신이 좀 때문에 와자까지 되는 숨보대 담바 끼고 숨긴 제와이. 가담은 이제 세지 청원에 도마 강그 전 장자 대 주로 세대 다 가서 수습 지원하시 전에 와자에 까 되는 숨보. 와 되는 숨세가 두에 되네라. 원변 되네. 아니 도대 되네지. 나와 숨보 출음지 나와. 아니 지지 쪼고체네 담바 두와당 이거지 나와 지지 쪼고체네 담바 도대당 시럽지 나와 도 지지 쪼고체네 담바데 아니 원변되네 실가나 오자외가 되는 숨보디때 담바 끼우숨기 제와인 세는 담바 끼우숨기 남지는 바게 제와 다 끼우숨기 남지는 바 끼우충오 아니 남전의 소와나 시체네 가시 탐내 간다 그 코위 대와 땀달라 라니 텐도니 제바 끼우더니 충우시 세가나 오탑 간다게 해서야 아니 나선 그동안은 지신 잡아다 꾸졌으면 접수 주 잠조당 렌레라 소와 아니 다 가서라 나도 람바라 때네 아니 제와 치마 온들려다 다 취주베 때 삼봉 온들려다 텐도니와 끼우든 충우당 아 아시다면 거기도 저한테 주셔 아니 되게 가서 아시다면 내가 거기도라니 저한테 주시자 시빈데라 잡초시 디벨레라 도타니 가시라시 잠테니 교테니 드시자 시바 코에 핀조 간지지 예나야 농아지 라시 예바 통네 아니 시비 핀조라 잡지 쳐와 디벨레는 도다지 시간아 아니다 시베 핀조 가서래 시바 코에 깨지기 주 아니 차단 무슨 그 그냥 비능하게 예시 당 뒤차단 무슨야 도발 챙게 도발 쳐봐 디벨라라 도단지 가시라시 잠느게 라시 잠되니 시간아 아니 디바 차단 무슨 그 년보 아니 나와서 관바 쳐봐라 때네 라니 코위 동아 녀월 시위 시와 텐도니가 되라 아니 저 등시차니 저 등시가 다 남정가라 저 텐이 진시차 Then the Randuaji Kasashua Nasenche, Randuaji Nawala, Mississippi Nation Kijikana, and the Teshala Pa, Captain Zamba, and Shanduaji Nawala, Mississippi Injury Chikiowa Yenza, Ranji to be Dumaji, Kalikasa, Shanji Dumate, Sewa Debate, and a Jewish in a Chambo. Ranji to be Chanji, Ranji to be Dumaji, and a Chanji Dumashi or Chabatella, and a Jewish in a Chimboshi, Segala, or Tendravi, and a Damaju Sumji, a Jew Sumji Lamji by Zeva is Tendravi, and a Gadam Jew Sumji Lamji or Gadam region Sergi Chumadi said that I am much Church and Sunday. I need Domden Chuji Javanama to Chunga in the Tendravi Gadam region Sergi Chumandi, Dova Kangadanja in Janita Sunga.
So to pick up from where we had left off yesterday, here we're in the English translation on page 48. The great guide Dromtonpa said as well, his wondrous word is all three the collections, advice adorned by the teachings of the three scopes, a gold and jewel rosary of the seers, meaningful to all who read its beads. So here, this is referring to his wondrous word is all three the collections. So this is referring to the training, the Vinaya, which primarily teaches us how to train in ethical conduct, the teachings of the Abhidharma, or higher knowledge, which primarily deal with the training in wisdom, and those collections of the sutras that primarily deal with generating meditative concentration. So this word it contains all of these three collections, and it also is adorned by the teachings of the three scopes, or the teachings for the three types of beings. So Atisha, in his Lamp for the Path, describes in a verse these three types of beings. So a being of small scope is someone who wants to gain a good rebirth in the future. So by having contemplated the sufferings of the lower realms and so forth, and having a kind of fear of that suffering, they take refuge in the three jewels, and based upon their understanding of karma, of the results of certain actions, they avoid engaging in non-virtuous actions, abandon negativities for the sake of striving after this goal of gaining a good rebirth in the future. And then for the being of middling capacity, they come to become sort of wary or renounce all of the excellencies of samsara. They have recognized that all of samsara is in the nature of suffering, and give rise to a wish to get rid of that. So they turn away from negative actions, which are motivated by our three poisons of attachment, hatred, and ignorance, and recognize that by training in the teachings of the Buddha, they are able to seek a peace, a kind of liberation for themselves. So a being of middling capacity has recognized, has sort of become disgusted or renounced the good things of samsara, is turning away from negative actions, recognizing that so long as we create those actions, we'll have to experience their results. And they train in these trainings in order to gain a kind of solitary peace for themselves. So that's the being of middling capacity, or middling scope. And then the being of great scope comes to recognize that just as we are unable to bear the sufferings of samsara, all other sentient beings are in that situation. And so the kinds of sufferings that we experience ourselves are tormenting all other beings. And so just as we ourselves suffer, we come to generate this desire to eliminate the sufferings of others, all of the sufferings and their causes. So this sort of attitude of taking on the burden of freeing other sentient beings then defines the being of great scope. And so here, this verse is, the next line refers to a gold and jewel rosary of the seers. That's actually referring to a text by Joel Atisha, which contains these teachings. And he continues saying, meaningful to all who read its beads.
Oh yeah, tena lavrin dinis, ani surab shenda shenda jang, ani cheba de papa. 체제 숨져서 명안 두체와 라도 랑대와 아니 라마다 고만 가서 신의 전부 누르다 조지 반대하되 최저 정가와 사원 정가와 전부는 서로 명하게 개바 인사 제주 현의 개바도 파바디 아니 체제 숨다 아니다 체와시 세담보다도 가면도 비치마 소람이 대유고만 예지 정보랑 같이 좋아서 서와기 체와시 권에 개바도 파바 인베 체준디다 보니 배상원 두바당 땡중원도 제견을 쏘라야 매바 주주저 바 상원 두바당 원도의 제견을 쏘라 매바 인자 라리라 코알레보직 차소나 아니 제위 소람을 그 사가나기 이게 사가나게서 이거 주사된다 사자 이게 소자지 춘자장 냠술련자 코니베 티나그 저자데 냠술련바 예자 코니베 오늘 라브린의 파르 소람 고자 체바기 아니 고자 집이 추지 때문에 보다 추소라 탐제지 대한 탐제 아니 늘 뒤바임 추소라 탐제지 탐제 늘 뒤바임 담바 용조라 과차바양 디다불라 세와 임베 세호 담바 용조라 과차바양 디다불라 세 차와 임베 투된 용조지 다보 세와양 다들소라 투된 용조지 다보다 산인 tumta yongzo ji se ne nyang su lian ba xi la mi xia seng da de de qi ge什么的呀我带着说
So, thus, it is that this teaching on the stages of the path to Buddhahood is far superior to any other teaching of the Buddha that you might choose. So here, these teachings on the stages of the path that have been articulated by the masters of the past, such as Tsongkhapa, Natisha, and so forth, is far superior, for it possesses what we call the three distinguishing features. So this means that it includes all topics and subjects of the Buddha's teaching. It's easily put into practice, and it's come down through masters of the tradition to us. And then it also has the four greatnesses. Here, the four greatnesses are realizing that all the teachings are consistent, seeing them all as personal advice, and being easily able to grasp the intent of the Buddha, and automatically avoiding the downfall of disparaging other Dharma teachings. So these are the special kind of features of this teaching on the stages of the path. And so the special qualities mentioned above are not found in even in such holy works as the Secret Collection, or actually the Tantras of Kuya Samaja, or the classical commentary known as the Ornament for Clear Realizations. So if you develop a good understanding of these steps of the path, then, as it gives this example here, you could go to any one of those satsa sheds around town where we dispose of old scriptures and images, pick up any scrap of writing that you find there, and know just where it fits into a lifetime of practice. So when you go from here to there, meaning from this single teaching on the steps out to the mass of the Buddha's other teaching, the steps are like a magic key that opens 100 different doors. So when we are able to understand the import of these teachings on the stages of the path, then all other teachings can be worked into that. We see how everything fits into a sequence of practice.
Oh yeah, 가서를 투된 용조지 고와 차봐야 대답을 차와 임배 투된 용조지 답을 세워야 사자 아니까 산마당 님마 팬당 팬 첨다 용조 세년 양수련 바시라 미세데스 데미자와데 대인데 투간다만 바자가 시안에 산이 탐제 직도 세외 아니 이게 차도 가던 산마그 차도 가던 님의 차도 미져봐 산이 탐제 직도 세네 세외 이게 차도 미져봐다 시송배자 시와인세 남이림바데 소라 탐제 누르장 다다중 권도 시와나서 되는 숨지 저자들 나왔음도 뒤와인상 누르장 되는 숨지 저자 뒤네 라베 아니 되는 숨라 탐제지 내 뒤와인 라른디 살라마 창주 예지 다토마 가서래 조제라지 대감가리라 쇼보제라 담바지라 팬비 최신 나와 소와 다바나 초에 아니 자주 남된데 송데 대내 송데 아니 남지는 바세비 찬이 생기 타녀데 나한테 아니 대내를 뭐 신도 아니 다게서 총알에
No. So, when having this ability to see, as has just been described, what we mean when we say someone has gained an understanding of the teachings in their entirety. So, therefore, too, the expression "master of all the Buddha's teachings" is not referring to somebody who has put together some neither here and neither there concoction of earlier and latter systems. They haven't just mixed all of these things together and who is trying to practice that mixed system. So this is explained from Tuken Dharmavajra, who said that try to mix up all the systems, the earlier and the later, and you end up outside of both. So that's not the point here of saying that these stages of the path contain all of the teachings. But here, when we say here that the entire teachings of the Buddha are packed into the stages of the path, what we mean is that every vital point of the teachings has been expressed through an abbreviated presentation of the topics contained in the 3 collections of scriptures. So the 3 collections, being the Vinaya, the Abhidharma, and the Sutras, condense all the 3 higher trainings in ethics, meditative concentration, and wisdom. And in that same sort of way, all of the essential points of the teachings are contained in the stages of the path. Now, as for this expression, the stages of the path or steps of the path, the sort of source of this is the Lama Zhangzhebu made a petition or asked Lord Atisha for a special instruction that would benefit the teachings of the Buddha in the world. And this is when Lord Atisha gave the lamp on the path to Buddhahood. And from that time onward, he referred to this as the stages of the path. And this is where the expression, the stages of the path, began to spread. But it's not the origin of the stages of the path.
Oh, yeah. Then, 저보다 제종하고 사소 잡아 때는 member 천디 다들마 총하라 마도 된다 아니 아니 좀 된대지 또 뒤바라 수만하시 시진도 뒤바나라 겨와 대다 마전 다다 강시 와서 알 천바다 다다 천신바다 마음반에 천바 교와 강시와 아니 대다 참제 아니 남 가르를 때는 엄마 저와 산자와레스나 그람 바로 천바 디인 많이 세가라 바로를 심벨람 라때네 아니란 엄마 저바 산제 요코마 오늘 채와 인상 다 엄마네 여바체 천데 다 도스마체 예송 라르시베 천유 공장 대인세요 민다야 공장 为了跑到去本地来先买一些，叫我去被带当，三节太大个，咱们看呢全部的是呢，俺呢，跑到去被咱们娘孙人把来，在那按冲把一张，空间电影，太大那老人的陪机器人把它。开始改点兵，改些是对吧？那改些是对等地了，没办法呢。说那么啥叫穷人？是他改些对呗，老人了没有没法没法，等说呢，说那么啥叫穷啊？200的，他这马上上街，他们家60岁修那么天修那么，但老人得了修那上街，他们家业余狂帮，上街他们家去，俺那托帮业余，俺那狂帮的托个人是来不动。
So this name then, or this title of stages of the path, came from this text of Atisha, but this doesn't mean that the meaning was something that had been made up, or this was the beginning of the stages of the path. Rather, as it says, this teaching though is by no means something that Lord Atisha and the great Tsongkhapa invented themselves. Rather, it is the grand highway along which each and every Buddha has traveled. So all Buddhas of the past, present, and future have traveled along this path. And from the abbreviated Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom, there's this quotation saying, "It is this perfection, nothing else, which is the path that's shared by all the victors, stay they in the past, the present, or the future. So this is the ultimate origin of this expression, stages of the path. It comes from this sutra on the perfection of wisdom. And so this is something that by traversing the path of the perfections is how all Buddhas of the past, present, and future actualize perfect, complete enlightenment. And so this is something that is not newly invented. So therefore, the teaching on the steps of the stages of the path is one for all Tibet. Some people have this idea that they don't have a wish to study it. They hold it to be a private instruction of the Gelug tradition. And it's not their fault. It's only because they have insufficient merit from their past deeds to think this way. And so it's in fact by traveling this path that is well worn by all the Buddhas that one eventually arrives at the state that all Buddhas have found. It's by traveling that same path that we ourselves are able to follow after and become perfect Buddhas, because all Buddhas became such by relying on these stages.
Oh yeah. Tenderly, any Lamjirimba, Sanje, you command Dobachev, Lamjirimba, Nyamsu Lamba, Shen, Tuna. Tishan Tele Shamba Shan do not Sanja Jingar, Sanja Songa Tamba Namja Matobi, Ani Salam Cancer, Chazachula Lebale, Mesonda, Lam Koni, Lam Rimba Tela, Loso Kosash, Ani Shambachila Yamsulabaina, Lebale Yeme, Ranjala Teta Be Kosa Shoto Mebar, say Lam Shendu, Lam Nobala Kosa Shoto Mebadi, Lavun Ditabo Yamsulenja Yobadi. 아니 조지 반대 아디샤다 장고 동거 처벽까지
So, if it were not this way, if this were not the path that all the Buddhas have traveled, then it might be the case, like, otherwise we might, it doesn't make sense that you'd go anywhere except to some weird path or level that no Buddha or any other high being of the past has ever reached. If you're striving to attain Buddhahood, you need to be following the path traversed by all of the Buddhas. So, you and I have no need to fear that we might ever make such a blunder. For we have the steps of the path for our practice due to the kindness of Lord Atisha and Lama Tsongkhapa, who clearly articulated this. We don't have to worry about going on a mistaken or a wrong path that leads to somewhere other than Buddhahood.
Oh yeah, that's 안 선바 최고 최천간 전도 여바 최고 아니 최고 최대 만화와 거와데다 개침벌에서 거를 만화와데라 라고와래 최라 다제자는 마제바 키 카사신도 강중차와 저거 말에서 가산예게 지모 가르로서나 로민네라양虽然论点天也问呢，年不年纪前玩些是罗这等等吧，是的，俺就去了把大节去送过的是吧？去年是了大节去，去你看年是年个去了呀大节去的，我看清楚没人的，俺这讲个本地的日本的的，大努不来说我就是这么几年上来呀，跟了就行，当然叫把去的吃，当然让最大努不来说话，俺呢吃的俺呢。long节个去加拉金个人那样，俺那天也不应当买，俺那跟我指望当让个大钱钱呢，俺那接把钱呢，俺那牛啊，吃的小娃就在那样，天天白把钱把通是，结果等你对嘛呢，他没去了让来样是，我等他没去，结果等你对嘛样，他去了让来话的，去年7、3星都3个看都样。俺你没觉把这确实吃把咱们些，俺你去了3吃把那些，确实让了偏多把几个3把几斤的，那把钱把给俺把几把看都样没觉把去看吃把得了，俺那口味怎么得的，没这把送过的呀，
So it's extremely important then to practice an unmistaken kind of a path. So people who have hopes of doing some kind of spiritual practice should study an unerring path such as this one. It continues saying it's not right just to practice anything you can get a hold of, like some stray dog that gobbles down anything he can find. Rather, it's important that we examine the Dharma that we are listening to, examine the Dharma that we're going to practice practice and investigate beforehand. If it's the case that we do this with affairs of this life, of things that we're going to buy, for example, we ask about it, we investigate ahead of time, then it's even more important when it comes to Dharma. So as the gentle protector Sakya Pandita has said, even in some insignificant business over a horse, a gem, or the like, you check, ask everyone, consider it well. We see people taking pains like this over even the smallest matters of this life. Gaining the ultimate goal of all our countless lives depends on Dharma. Yet we prize any Dharma we might come across, not checking if it's good or bad, and act like dogs with scraps of food. So here, we should not just immediately sort of gobble up or take anything in, but rather we need to investigate the Dharma. This is something that it is an important enough matter that we should have investigated for ourselves and checked into it before we begin to practice it. So even with worldly affairs, if you're buying or selling something, you take a lot of care, you do everything you can to make sure you don't make a mistake.
다 되게 드라마송도 그냥 배지 책 배나 다시 쉬어나지 책이 샤와 녀존다고 주세요. 아니 나조지 샤라치 랑게자 다자 난된 체장 아니 대 아니 논주 중나양 지상 추나양 책이 책치마라 판에 가야 뭐지 책이라 아니 판데마도 책치마라 판에 가야 뭐지 최노바시다 차나 개와 땡기 뒤마 추줘와 저 때니 되마 추조세 오 텐더위 아니 최노바데 지 엠비네스 두바 첼로 차장세 아니 엠베 땡디 두바 첼로 차장 최노바지 초나 야 가소레 당아 차라 마노와지 메나 좋아 첼로 차장 당아 차라 마노와 냠솔레바 도르투바시 메나 아니 다 쳐놓아지라 아니 냠냠 쳐봐지나야 파쟁아와 되면이래 맞아버렸어 깔깔게와지 되면이래 맞아버렸어
So here then, if it is the case that in every little matter of this present life, we investigate, we take a lot of care to investigate things before we buy them, we ask questions and so forth, then those affairs, those things don't affect our future lives, no matter what sort of possession we buy or something. This isn't a possession that will have an effect on our future life. But no matter how big a mistake you would make with something like this, so with a worldly affair, it's not going to help or hurt you in your future life at all. But with Dharma practice, if we're seeking to practice the Dharma, then this is something that can affect our future lives, that will affect our future lives. So if we enter into a mistaken path, then that can affect the ultimate goal of all of our lives. So it's really important that we investigate and check through the Dharma that we're going to try to practice, because this isn't something that we want to make a mistake with. This is even more important than the sort of worldly affairs.
Oh yeah. 어디空了 안에 지지 말라기 대년주지 담바 먹어봐 다 대년주지 아마 그만하면 년년 교박이 안에 담바 먹어봐 담바 대배 시와체네 마고봐 내 리제도 소양 세 담바 친지 마로바 마임바 담바 과와지 내 리제도 소양 안에 관바던데 이나야 안에 랑가라도 랑도 녀와다 치바데 내 리제 소양 랑도 인시송
So, unless you are practicing instructions that you know are unmistaken and totally correct, then what you do will be basically a waste of time. You'll be putting your effort into something that isn't going to get you anywhere. It's just going to be a waste. And so here, as for the sort of to give a source for this, Lord Milarepa once said that if you don't meditate on advice that has been passed down ear to ear, that has been passed down through authentic lamas, then the place you can sit in a mountain cave, but only to torture yourself. So here, if we have a kind of mistaken dharma, it's not something that we know we can trust in, then you can end up wasting a lot of effort and actually even torturing yourself without bringing forth any kind of results.
오야 ngaji lozawa chenpo tagi ane gaja tuma jade tarin jagaji yune ane che chedan denba ane pedi den chamba yang ane pedi ngarki chelo tezu koma chobares ma choba yinza ane che namda jagane den chango wa tena chungo kangla chiyu pu kangla tu gowa shindu rangi nyamso lenji cheji tusa tena mano wa ane tembi dabo ane sanje domba sanje tubashi kukure tenze mayimba che kung meba ane kasore temba ya sanje ji temba ya tusan meba jine jidi tusan meba che kung meba dendagala ane lo tongdo druba che jang toba sanje neji jang mi tiga mare mar dene chusuba dan draware
So now the master translators of old undertook a great many hardships, journeying afar to the land of India to bear authentic Dharma teachings back to Tibet. But those in Tibet who followed a mistaken path couldn't live up to them at all. So translators, others were engaging in many hardships to go to meet with Dharma of an authentic source. And so like that, really good water should at the end of its ends trace back to some pure snow. So just in that same way, whatever dharma we choose to practice should have its ultimate origin in something infallible, the very Lord of the Word, the teacher in the Buddha. So one needs to have an authentic source for one's practice, have it trace back to the words of the Buddha. If you don't have an authentic origin, then it says you can spend 1,000 years struggling to practice some Dharma teaching that has no authentic origin, and you still won't get a single sliver of true realization. It's like thrashing water to make butter. You can try as much as you want to churn water, but you're never going to get butter from that. And in the same way, if you don't have Dharma with an authentic source, no matter how much you practice, you won't get results.
Oh yeah, 냠술렌지 쳐대라 간지 고아래서 대단나 냠술렌지 쳐대라 아니 개발순다 대봐 그러 냠술렌지 쳐대 아니 도바 산제지 송바 아니 도바 산제고 송바들 밴디되게 파도 안에 가서 파투 줄라서 왔다라 로체지 견슈 마슈 아니 제바게 땡라 팝데 아니 견나 견데다 파사와 tendawi che de nyamsu lamba la tenne ane chuyo wangjo namji tesang gosung zayde ane toba tuji la chungne rimji njiba dan jeba de cheche sumda dambashi gogore
No. So when we are deciding on a teaching, then, it should have these three distinguishing characteristics which make it unmistaken or worth our practice. So first is that it should have been taught by the Buddha. We should be able to trace the source back to the Buddha. And it should have been cleared or cleaned of any errors. Sages must have brought forth the teaching to its authentic final form, having examined it to determine whether any wrong ideas crept into it after the Buddha taught it. So through sort of a process of debate and investigation, it should have been cleared of any errors, anything that might be inauthentic in that. And finally, it should have brought true realizations to the hearts of master practitioners once they have heard, considered, and meditated upon it. And then it must have passed to us through the various generations of an unbroken lineage. So these are the three characteristics that make it an authentic teaching.
Oh yeah, tendawi ane cheche sumda demba tendachi chungna ane she chetan tenyi da demba yinbe ane rangi ba nyuri dan che de nyamlem che na ane nyamlem che wa na che toba jule che rangi nyuri dan che de nyamlem ma che na ane ma che na ma che ba par mali na so ne ane ma che na ane cheji chulu de yo ma res ro par mali na 세간에 냠렘 채나 아니 또봐 줄에 매겨와 쓰고 말해서 냠렘이 par mali na cheji chulu도 먹어 뭐 되네 라브린 디티 cheji 가래서 나 아니 자주 남지를 받으래서
So, if we find a Dharma with these three characteristics, then we know that this is an authentic Dharma. And so, even though from our side we might fail to practice it properly through lapses in our effort and daily practice, so we may not ourselves be able to take up the practice completely purely or perfectly, but we can still we never need to fear that the teaching from its side will fail us. We should know that this is an undeceiving, unfailing kind of a teaching. And that authentic teaching is this very steps of the path. This is the highest, the supreme of everything that the Buddha spoke.
Oh yeah. That is Sanjay Sura Kunji Rabda Chote and Shijin to the Rimbochi can do some. Or Shijin to the Rimbochi la. Shijin to the Rimbochi Jaja Della, and no more than Sami Turnam, Annie Laurindo Sami Lamji Rimbatu. Whether Sami Lamji Rimbatiang and in Duvatang. Shudi Jaji with Turnam, Sirigana Jaji with Lamjirimba, Annie Sanjuka Sem and Jedi, and Chidula also, last or Jaji with Lamjirimba Dine, Tembe, Yamsuji Chetala Manobani, Chanju Lamjirimba, Dikwana Yembe. She Yamanishi on to the one Namji, and it hung Yava Lamjirimba Telachukogre.
So this authentic teaching, the stages of the path, is the highest, the supreme of everything that the Buddha spoke, and is the precious collection of the teachings on the perfection of wisdom. So in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, the overt subject matter of these teachings consists of the instructions on the profound, on emptiness. So the sort of manifest object or subject matter is the instructions on the profound side. These are included in the stages within which we call the profound stages. So that side which is dealing with wisdom we refer to as the profound. The wisdom sutras also present what are known as the far-reaching or the vast, extensive instructions, those that work to save all living beings. These points are included in the steps within which we call the far-reaching steps or stages. So this is then the only teaching that contains both the profound view and the vast or extensive activities. And this is completely free of any kind of error. It's complete and free of error. This is why people who are looking for a Dharma teaching that is worthy of their practice should most surely begin with these stages of the path. It's complete and unmistaken, containing both of these profound and the vast.
Oh yeah, that's the interesting. What is Gashi Pamari research Shango Lema Pena so Logic and Rani Liwani Digi Luna Goades. Keruchumbo Nanjoa Tambo Pen Digi so Penju Kung Chiji Lotto City Annie or Imata Sangan Dreva Imanta Pen Dreva Tilla Mashuche Tela Yan by Ken Jagado Pede Sanga Samala Jamba Tarchimba Dradi and Truto Trotovanere.
So we can see that there are some people who hold to a sort of loyalty to the traditions that they were born into. Some are like Pun by birth, and they follow in this path without examining or looking at it well. And this leads to their being sort of not able to accomplish the aims of this life or future lives. It gives here the example of Kyungpo Neldor, who was in the beginning a follower of the Pun tradition, and seeing that it didn't have an authentic origin, he then turned to the Nyingma scriptures, which had been kind of mixed together with the Pun, and eventually he ended up going to India to seek out teachings of an authentic source, and was able to bring out accomplishments. So we can see that there are those who abandon their first path to find the correct path.
Oh yeah, that's the much pen. Such a good use of Shan Teta Jabba 아르텐데 임바라 아니 지에수 아니 가던 사마라 만전 자세 담바는 마마디에서 자세 담바 탐제 아바 제진 테나 가도 시비 람사보 마노와 마주와 가와단 데베 가사 타바데바는 중고데 주비 고담바니 달람제 좋은 남바심보데 세바 자세 담바 남지 아바 제진 아니 테나 가네 시바 시벌집에 람사보 마노와다 마주와다 가와단 데베 가사 타바데바는 중고데 아니 주비 고담바데 아니 대답에 남지는 바 조스보데 원치다女性 다그 샤바차세 다 샤바제 계사 담바 남지 아빌람 간단 탄데 남지 중고데 치다女性 다그 샤바차세 다 샤바 탐자데 두수연 거래 계사 담바 남지 아바 제신 람저 숨가라잖아 람저 조 남보 숨보데 계사 담바 남지 아빌람 가와단 데베 중고 두잔 남지 아니 중고 와 대답에 남지는 뭐 저거 남세 간에 탄데 남지 중어 제사도 간에 요데 시단女性 다그 샤바 차세네 아니 샤바 담자와타 시단女性 샤바 지단라 아니 제라니 큰지 비치 흉배 같이 봐 아니 두 샤미니 같은 배 큰주는 샤뉴바 임발라 아니 치단 女性 是큰주 비친다 전든디 최용호시기 나도 전자체 자 강치시 아니 가서를 체 강도 제 숨이 되래 남전나마서 최용호 되게 나도 전자체와 자체와시 체 강도 안 자체 아니 송바레스
So then here, regarding this first verse, where Gelama Tsongkhapa says that as far as I'm able, I'll explain the essence of all the high teachings of the victors, the path that all their holy sons commend, the entry point for the fortunate seeking freedom. So here, this is, he's saying, the main teaching here is the three principal paths, and it is that excellent path that all the victors' holy sons commend. So this is praised by all of the sons of the victors as the path on which they travel. This is something that has no error, it has no mistakes, it's not deceptive in any way. And it is the highest of all doorways. It is the entry point for those people of good fortune seeking freedom. And when he says here, as far as I am able, I'll explain, this is the sort of promise, the pledge to compose the text. He's saying that he will engage in this kind of composition. And so here, the words where it says that as far as I am able in the verse are generally put there by Lord Tsongkhapa as an expression of modesty. So we see this sort of humility or modesty. And more specifically, they're saying that as far as I am able, I will explain something of as great meaning as can be put into the few words here. So he is doing this in an abbreviated fashion. He is explaining these three principal aspects of the path that all the victors' holy sons commend, that is this entryway for all of those fortunate ones seeking freedom. He's going to put this in an abbreviated form here in this text.
Oh yeah, that 아니 제유선라 군지 인비데 자사 담반 남정 아벨라 간데 탐제 남지 중호대세 가라 오 대송가 남전나서 숨가라 자네 제유선라 군지 인보야 남전나서 자사 담반 남정 아벨라면 남전나서 간데 탄전 남지 중호대야 남전나서라 자대 샤와 자단데 대체 난들이 요데라 가상 쉬와 나신 전에 아니 다 가서 지금 뭐야 시체 체주야 야나 제루지라스 제루지라 제루소라 시소지 지간 탐보기 안에 내주셔야 돼 대야 간절히 생각주셔야 돼 간절히서나 아니 전배 천주 가서 특별 숨정에 좀 특별 지기 되구나 시와다 산제기 장된도 타도 되봤음 송아래 타도 예랑 그 되바 년도 되바 라자지 되바 뭐 된도 타도 되바지도 주바래 와 시와다 산제기 장된도 되바서 선방 어디 타도라 되데 되바지도 내신 타도 그 되바 대신도 개위 송라 탐제 아니 누지 주라 아니 다 토마 내중 기회 잡수 송배 내중데 아니 산제기 땜바지 토마 안에 가서 최대 나셔는 내가 좋아 되나 치면 나셔는 내가 좋아 되네 아니 가서 찬주가 셈기와 고고 인자 누지지라 타두게 내중 기회 잡수 송배 타두게 내중 기회 잡수 송배 인자 개위 송라 군지 이미 된서 단 거지 토마 코알라 이촌에서 코알라 내중 게네 아니 거기 동안 여러 시비 타바 탐적을 로게와 양 내중 군디 게와서 담담봉 내중 게니 내중 군에 게와 디안 토마 내중 그 사바담바레 세계위 소라 군지 님비 된서 가라 내중 그 사바데데
So there's one way of reading this first verse that says, now in the English and the Tibetan are a little bit different, but so these 3 lines that say, the essence of all the high teachings of the victors, the path that all their holy sons commend, and the entry point for the fortunate seeking freedom. Each of those lines could be read as referring to the 3 principal aspects of the path, but there's another way to understand them, which is glossing these lines as each referring to one of the 3 principal aspects. So according to this other way of glossing this verse, the first line of the explanation, which is the second in this English, the essence of all high teachings of the victor, is referring to renunciation. So as chanting the names of Manjushri says, the renunciation of all 3 vehicles lies in the end in a single vehicle. So the point is that the Buddha, in some of his teachings, which should be interpreted rather than taken literally, said that there were 3 different vehicles or ways, and this is something that has to be interpreted because ultimately there is only one final vehicle. In a similar sense, all the high teachings of the victors were enunciated or given as a means to produce the ultimate renunciation, Buddha's knowledge within the minds of disciples. And renunciation is what at the very beginning urges one to develop a disgust for the cycle of life and set their mind on reaching freedom. So this is why the attitude of renunciation is taught here first in the first line. So according to this explanation, this first line, the essence of all the high teachings of the victors, is referring to renunciation of these 3 vehicles in an interpreted sense, but for the final single vehicle.
오야 다진에 자세 담반나 영아비 람 세가나 아니 자주셈 야와당 자세 자주셈 반남지 아니 투담지 투드지 아니 아바 줘봐 세데 아니 자주셈데 아니 예매기 아니 가서 산재주 고마 토바 쳐봐데 자주셈 예매라라라 봐데 자주셈 특별히 남지 주고양 아니 자주셈 임바 샘비 예매기 아니 자주 샘바 샘비 샘비 그자 탐제 아니 산제주 고마토바가 들죠와 인자 진짜 인자 야사 야다 야사 남지 투담지 투도 제정 아바 줘봐 티바치베 남지 소신다고 안 소신다고 샘지特조 남지 흉신데 남지 줘봐 남지 시단 땡 송아 나치 전에 오다 티바치베 남지 시단 땡 안에 소신다고 대 자주 샘인 바인장 아니 자사 담반 남지 아베 람 제가라 자주 샘에 담바체
So the second line of this verse then that says the path that all their holy sons commend, this line of explanation is referring to then in this understanding of it, the wish to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings. So this is the attitude that all the victors and their offspring take as the single most important meditation, the attitude whose praises they sing. So this attitude of bodhicitta, once one has taken it up, you enter into the Mahayana, and whatever sort of virtuous activities you do while held with this mind of bodhicitta go towards the cause of perfect, complete enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So this, having this attitude of bodhicitta is like a great center beam that holds up the entire structure of the greater way. So by having this attitude of striving after enlightenment for the sake of all, one enters into the middle way, and everything that is held by that attitude goes towards this cause of enlightenment. And so in this way, it's like the center beam holding up the whole structure.
Oh yeah. 다들이 간된 가서 간된 탄도 남지 중어대 세가라 되기 아니 양답에 따와셔와 까와단 때문에 두자 타반되바 되비 가사기 안 두자 남지 아니 중어 지보 세가라 아니 타바타바기 파벨 아니 파바기 람 팔람 토야기 중어대 아니 양답 돈용 모습 되비 시인장 나바타병고 송거아래 돈용 모습도 또 마도게 가는 팔람 토마도 바샤가 인바인장 그와 제가 선배 탄대 남지 중어 양답에 따왔다 대한 타바토발라 아니 타바토바 제발라 아니 톱지기 토발라 파도 제베기 아니 가서래 쪼데 아 코에서와 단지 말이바 방고 말이바 쪼고 대제발라 담에부터 베셔라 쪼고 담에부터 베셔라 깨발라 대제발라 아니 어디 담에부터 베셔라 쪼고 대제발라 양답에 따와제서 가서 대제발라 양답에 따와제다 자 담에 베셔라 쪼고 담에부터 베셔라 깨와 정제 미제바 담에 오심도 담에 또 베셔라 깨네 콤바 콘도 패디 잠바 아니 오심도 또바 디잖아 아니 파벨 람토 나바타베 고토 되네 이마 신도 아니 콤베 아니 다 이마 신도 콤베 아니 단지 말이 바사베다 제와 반데 타바 토바 제바 인장 양답에 제와 양답에 따와 제 람조 숨셰바 탐제 제바 인 스타디
So then this third line, which says the entry point for the fortunate seeking freedom, is referring to then the correct view of emptiness. So this perception is the one and only entry point for disciples who seek freedom. So in order to, this is the entry for any sort of superior path or the path of an Arya, by which one is able to cut the root of cycling in samsara. So to achieve freedom, to achieve this kind of liberation, you have to cut ignorance, the root of this circle of life. And to cut ignorance, you have to develop wisdom which realizes no self. So in order, this line referring to the entry point for the fortunate seeking freedom, anyone who wishes to travel to liberation, to gain an Arya path such that they are able to get to a state of freedom or peace, need to have the correct view, this wisdom realizing emptiness. Without this wisdom, you're unable to get out of samsara. So to cut ignorance, you have to develop the wisdom which realizes no self, or which realizes the lack of the self in the way that we grasp it. And to develop wisdom, you need a correct view free of all error. So by having come to an understanding of the view, and then habituating ourselves to that, accustomizing our mind more and more, we eventually have a direct realization of emptiness, which is then able to liberate us from samsara. So here, correct view is the single door to nirvana, to peace, and this is why it's used in this line to indicate the third principal aspect of the path.
Oh yeah, that 되게 셔바 탐자디 루벤 렌드 공부다 슝우지 제자 제자 남수 용수 셔지 남지 류 용수作用 오 참아데 다시아바 탐자디 간도 아니 가서래마 뒤에 땜바래 손 뒤에 숨배나 옹내바 땜바야 인송서 어때 남자 숨정 옹 땜바야 인송서
So then, by making this sort of pledge to compose the text, the pledge is made in the way prescribed by the Indian master, and so Tsongkhapa abbreviates within it all the topics to be treated in the work itself, which here would be to say that he includes within the pledge every essential point in the entire body of the paths to be explained. So all of the essential points are contained here within the pledge to compose this work.
Oh yeah, that thing Sheba Tamjawa de Chinsen. That's what the Yamba Guatella. And it's our Kanda Sibi de la Machashin. Sibakoi de la Machashin. Thing is Jung Chago in Bari. Tanju Chaji Jumbai said, and it's Chanju Samsung in Bari. Java Jibi Lana, you didn't be said, Yanda Betawala Chago to Sena to go at it. 第三节机会，咱们修些送完那些杨大别打完了，家伙送完那些钱呢？家伙机会，咱们的杨大别打完了天呢？我天这边，俺那咱们就是咱们是不的，俺那年比高啊，但不太大，俺那我唐玉国呢，你说他早就从他听见了，是吧？写完，但不知道嘛用过的呀。
So then the next verse is this sort of encouragement to study or to listen to this text. And so here, again, the fourth line in the Tibetan will come first in the English, but it says, "Listen with a pure mind, fortunate ones, who have no craving for the pleasures of life, and who, to make leisure and fortune meaningful, strive to turn their minds to the path which pleases the victors." So here again, we can see the three principal aspects of the path condensed into this verse. So the line, who have no craving for the pleasures of life, this is referring to the attitude of renunciation, turning away from the pleasures of samsara, and who make leisure and fortune meaningful, striving to make that meaningful, that is referring to the attitude of bodhicitta, the wish to attain complete and perfect enlightenment for the sake of all. And then finally, the path which pleases the victors is referring to the correct view here. So all three principles are encapsulated in the verse.
Oh yeah, that did it. Sheva Den Tiang, Kanda Sibi Devala, Kanda Sibi Devam. Siba Koala, Siba Koa, Devam Pinzola, Yikaji Machabar. Ani Sibi and Dunga Yavara Sibi, Ani Taba Tom de Chen. Tom de Chen, Ani Tanjo Dan Toba de Tenyoba Chavi Chiri, and then la Nimbo, Lemba Deba Namji, Se Kota, then a Nimbo Deba, Lemba Deba Namji, and it Akarisana, Nimbo Lindika Lam Wabatang, and a Lam Kowatang. Ani lam mago jang lam ji la cha xian zam jian la gam cha xian zam ma yin ba ani san jie jang tu ji bi xie ba ta du la ma no xie ba ta du la ma no ma ye ba 是吧？上节讲土基为些吧，他都南马诺瓦当，南马国瓦当，恰恰瓦啦，去老国国人是呀，南国瓦当，听着恰恰咱马人吧，南马诺瓦当，马国瓦当，马诺瓦当，南恰恰瓦现在老国人是
So then this second verse, the commentary to it says that you people who are seeking freedom and have not even a single moment's craving for the pleasures of life. So this again is referring to renunciation. Those who strive after freedom, who wish to get out of the cycle of samsara, who don't have any sort of craving or desire for the pleasures of this life, who want to get the absolute most from the body you found, so to make your leisure and fortune meaningful, you are now going to have to train yourself in a path that never errs, a path that never strays, a path that is whole and complete. So in order to fully make meaningful the freedoms and endowments that we have now, one should train in a path that is never mistaken, that isn't going to go astray in any sort of a way. So this making leisure and fortune meaningful is referring to bodhicitta. And then the path which pleases the Buddhas, the one in the end they advise, a path, again, that is not errant in any way, a path that doesn't go astray, a path that isn't some sort of piece of a path or a part of a path, but rather contains everything. That's what you need to train in if you are striving after these goals.
Oh yeah. 다 근데 냠바 구와 인장 냥겐기 로 안에 가서라 너단다 간대지 고아래서 누자들라 간대지 고아래서 안에 누지 생이 셔야 되라 로마 대박 로마 대한 간대지 고그래서 되라 안에 시자와라 다중 권도 샤와나 신전에 순내 로수분내와 내년집이 셔라단 담바 안에 담아라 퇴니 예와 어다 퇴지 고인장 순내 론된 퇴니 예바 냠보 내제 자와 자 제송바 딸을 천이단 댐비 로마 철라 유럽도 댐비 간den기 도자 남지 년주대 어 텐더위 다 가상에 셔와나 신전에 내규 순보당 아니 튀전도 시출 댐비 고네 아니 아니 최다 아니 최대마 보라 타위 이지 아니 녀세가라 아니 녀네 야바고와 대 도시 자야 돼 란서 숨가라 자나 자야 돼
So then this is the encouragement for us to listen to this or study this. So if you want to train in this kind of a path, you have to have the requisite qualities of a disciple, of a student. And so as I quoted yesterday, the qualities of the student should be, as it says in the 400 verses, we call someone a proper vessel for study, who's unbiased, intelligent, and willing to strive. So for those who are interested in studying this path, they need to have an unbiased kind of mind, have a certain kind of discriminating intelligence, as well as a willingness to strive. So here where Gelama Tsongkhapa is encouraging to study all three principal aspects of the path. He says, and fortunate ones like you, disciples who have turned their mind to Dharma, are going to have to listen with a pure mind. Avoid in your study those things which are opposed to its success. So the three problems of the pot or faults of a vessel that we talk about, as well as relying on those things which are conducive to our success, which is the 6 images of instruction. So these are sort of the ways that one should be listening to this advice and instruction. And what one is listening to is these 3 principal aspects as this goes with each of the previous lines.
Oh yeah. 다중 혼도 샤바는 자니 자와라 대진 대화 샤바 나신 전에 다 특제를 내중 창수를 자 저리가라 양디 대주지라 간다 시비들라 마차신 세가라 당의 중체 혼도 샤바 나신 중체 단주퇴 세가 단주 창주의 셈줄에 개별관의 단주 전화된 바 치고 이제 단주퇴니 창주의 셈데 창주의 셈을 로자나 안에 단주지 님보 랍 안에 사제 고마 두투바 인장 창주의 셈을 로자나 단주지 님보 랍 줄량바인 되게 안에 단주퇴자지 좀 봐야 세들의 창주의 셈체 아니 자와 기회 남라 랍슈베 세디 자와 기회 소니 따와라 자고래 양답에 따와라 양답에 따와라 자고래 따와 마게 남주 중호라 말가라 아니 양답에 따와 된데 가라 가시宽대 쳐나 탐제지 코와장 양아랜 대비 쳐나 탐제지 güney나야 루반 메동신 전에 다 단다 마와 통거를 코안 주도 그러봐 코안 주비 아니 마리발라 때네 레산네 레지남이 레지 가서 바자남시지 공부하는 남시든도 그네 아니 대라 신랑그 쇠다 발라 때네 아니 코르께와 렘바고 코안 주비는 뭐 규제지당 마리반 도베 레도베 아니 레지 바자고와 도네 되네 깨워지 양식이 깨워 도바 인장 아니 대가소래 관도비는 봐 말이 그거 비는 바지기다 대송용 말이 자 지위도 자고 쇼니에 가시 콘데 최남 탐제지 콘데 군대 남양서 고안 주비를 배워 그 군대당 도비를 배워 그 군대 대다 나양 유래 대부디 중화 루와 매바탕 루와 매바 통신 미비대서 미비대서 간이시 매장 안데 라시지 마주와 인생이 미비대서 아니 콘데 덴바집이 덴징기 미비대서데 아니 라시지 주바 아니 시바데 시바데 아니 가서를 동밤 시밤 까바 미비대서 간이 시바 괜히 산제집이 남라 쇼 전에 송바 시순소 세인자 양답에 따와라 자와집이 남라 이 양답에 따와 줘야 돼 뒤송해 바래
So, here then, as I said previously, there's a way of interpreting this verse which regards each of the three lines as referring to one of the three principles of the path. And so the first line, which says that who have no craving for the pleasures of life, is referring to this attitude of renunciation, the first of the three principal paths. So the first line then is referring there to renunciation. The next line, the one about making your leisure and fortune meaningful, applies to the wish to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings. Because for anyone who's trained his mind in this attitude has certainly gotten the absolute most from his life of leisure and fortune. So this second line of making life meaningful, or taking the sort of essence from life, is referring to bodhicitta and this attitude to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all, which is the most sort of superior, best way to make one's life meaningful. And the final line about the path which pleases the victors relates to the correct view, and we see this later on in the text. I think it's the 12th verse, where it says, "A person has entered the path that pleases the Buddhas when for all objects in the cycle and beyond, he sees that cause and effect can never fail, and when for him they lose all solid appearance." So this path that pleases the Buddha is related to the correct view. This is another, like, giving a name to that correct view, this path pleasing to the Buddhas. And here, this individual, when all objects, when all phenomena, whether in samsara or beyond samsara, you have this you understand that cause and effect can never fail. So the cause of samsara, the fact that we have this ignorance, which then leads us to engage in karmic actions, and then on the basis of that we take rebirth and so forth, one understands that this is infallible, this cycle of engaging with samsara, wherein one, driven by ignorance, then creates karma and so forth, and it has to cycle through samsara. And similarly, the stages of reversing samsara by eliminating that ignorance which grasps at true existence or some kind of intrinsic existence, one is then able to turn away karma and all of the birth and so forth that comes from that. So one has a solid sort of confident faith in cause and effect, in the stages of engaging with samsara and the stages of reversing those. And when for all phenomenon, they lose solid appearance, it says here. There are other ways that could be translated, but this is referring to that phenomena lose their appearance as though they had some kind of intrinsic existence. So there is a realization of emptiness which is conjoined with this confident sort of faith in cause and effect, seeing the infallibility of those. This then is referred to as a path that pleases the Buddha, and this is referring to the correct view, as it is here in this first or second verse.
Oh yeah, that 저기 안에 가서 가서래 쳐봐다 좁아 탐제와다 냠바고와 남자 대두 차제, 是吧? 간에다 타야 유진이 세대 냠바고 대한체니 단디 러브린 친구 나신 체체니 아니 다 자와되지나 아니 살자라 치콩 좀 받아 배잡아 쳐와 당하나 그와 기위지 취지 쳐와 시원이 된지 쳐라 년세 지다 제유수 담방어질로 마치다 되게 봐 전에 사제시 러브린도 연구하러 와 어떤지 마 된지 자와되지나 아니 주실라만 남라 찾아로 세대 치콩 좀 봐. 담바 최대한 아니 치콩 좀 받대 담바 가르에서나 왜 아니 냐메사제 생거네 쉬운데 아니 좀봐 신도 자체미 남제를 받아 잡아 토메다 아니 어제부 잔다 루두라 소와 좀봐 신도 마 주티치 뭐 주니 용아 인바 치콩 좀 받대 야가체 주진아만을 찾아로 어디 아니 치콩 좀 받대 아니 잡아 배쳐와 대세 아니 제비소라고 이시와네 아니 대가서 제비소람네 샤바차 시위까지 취지쳐와 아니 취쳐와 시티임바 어디 대바타자 까메도 배쳐와 소람네 당한테 대외자 교육고만 예지시 뭐랑 참 주배쳐와대 아니 어디 대다바 제비소라고 내 지단이시 당 샤바차 세대 봐라 아니 취지쳐와대 대바차 시군 잡아을 쳐봐. 당하나 그와 기회 취지 쳐봐 대처받자. 내일 간다 세배 내라 마차시 시와네 간단 되다 다음에 이기 뇌 시위 가나 아세냐세 기타 제외 수대 바지냐세 기타 제외 수난단 말이 어디 가나 아니 쉐샤바을 차니 냠바비 아니 이제 차니 아니 냠바고 쳐라 아니야세 기타 제외 수대다 다 도서 마치대 아니 다티는 마음만자니 아니 담방어지라 마치다 되는 바데 다티 마자 두스마 러브링 사제잖아 두스다 다다 들어와다
So then this completes the presentation of the customary preliminaries. So offering of praise or homage and prostration, pledge to compose the work, and the encouragement for the reader to study it well. So you could relate what's been said in this sort of opening passage to the kind of outlines that one sees in the various other presentations of the stages of the path, the great stages and the middling and so forth. And so here, the first line of this text, which reads, I bow to all the high and holy lamas, could be read onto the topic of demonstrating the eminence of the author in order to demonstrate the teaching comes from an authentic source. So that point of the traditional Lamrim outline is contained in that first line. And then the normal sort of set of outlines is first demonstrating the greatness of the originator, showing the authentic source, showing the greatness of the Dharma itself, the teaching that is to be presented, the sort of method by which one listens to and teaches the Dharma that has these two attributes, and then finally the method of leading the student by means of the actual instruction. So the first line goes with the first of those points, and then the second line, or the second verse, from as far as I am able. So as he says in this text, the first verse, as far as I'm able, I'll explain the essence of all high teachings of the victors, the path that all their holy sons commend, the entry point for the fortunate seeking freedom. That section demonstrates the eminence of the text itself. And this next section that says, listen with a pure mind, up to the end of that second verse, which ends with the path that pleases the victors, gives us the third topic heading, which is how to study and teach the stages of the path. So this is the third sort of outline topic in a normal Lamrim teaching. And finally, the last great section of the presentation is known as the instruction itself, by which students can be led along the stages to Buddhahood. And so this topic is contained within the main body of the text, which is what we will move on to now.
Oh yeah, that 되게 대칭찬자네. 근데 냠바고와 다대 이제 칭찬이. 와. 당 단지 리징 단지 지 링을 샤바텔라 아니다 내주 샤바 장주의 섬 샤바 양다베 다와 샤바 숨체 어디가라 내와년에 다 잡자 린스 뒤는 가라 남정 잡자데 되시 잡자 시호데 되고 아래 내주 샤바 장주의 섬 샤바 양다베 다와 샤바 아니 내와년에 두발로 꾸와 담바 세데 다 잡자 타마디 샤데 되고 아래 다 담은 내주 샤바텔라 잡자 숨체네你就借给予军战，你就借别出，你就借别拆下吧，是这的，你啥叫送钱？那他们你就超过于军战的啦，借给予军战嘛，你们就超过于军战的啦，那么当你就没把事做也是我的。那么当你就没把事情，考完了你我这边你就没把啦。是把课外错了，是把课外错意是吧？视频的话给点点团队那边，他要嘛的是了干把有讲留下那么是把了干把么恰把一样，恰把一样，留下那么他妈过年开始过年亲戚留下那考了亲戚那个，他亲我的恰把给。他妈开的时候，眼睛考了、考完了，他妈眼睛扎过来，青蛙的了，考完了，他妈眼睛扎过来也是，他咱们得看说的，咋个这天的，他接了用过的话，对天的细节，
So then this treatment of the main body of the text, which according to the other Lamrim outlines is the method of leading the student by means of the actual instruction. So here, this is broken down into 4 topic headings: the explanation of renunciation, an explanation of bodhicitta, an explanation of the correct view, and then strong words of encouragement for the one who has read this to go out and actually practice it. So each of these topics will then be broken down into various subheadings. So the first topic of renunciation is broken down into why we should develop renunciation, the reasons why it is important to have renunciation, followed by then how one goes about actually giving rise to renunciation, and then the sort of measure of having generated renunciation. So the first verse then of this section on renunciation begins by saying, there's no way to end without pure renunciation, this striving for pleasant results in the ocean of samsara. So without renunciation, there's no way to end our striving after or seeking for the pleasant things of samsara, of this within this ocean of samsara. And it's because of their craving for samsara that, as well, that beings are fettered or are bound in samsara. So seek renunciation first. So it's because of this sort of craving, attachment to the things of this life that beings are bound within it. So it's important then that we first, at the beginning, strive to generate this attitude of renunciation.
Oh yeah, that thing is you talk about in the country what is Ranja Koala Taba Chabala, so Koa Shivani, and then around the lineage Shawajanji Pumbo de la Koa Sigware, Dunga Koa Chan Pumbos. And the lineage Wangi, any or class or an Yenton Jova Pumbi Juisun at the Tennyson, Takaja Pumbo de la Koa. Ranja Koa lineage Wanga Pumbo de Len Chinjala, and the Dunga Ranshin la Madaba Yenda, lineage Wanga Pumbo de la Tabachicoa Yenda, Ranja Koala Tabar Chabala. 아니 다 양력이 징비 아니 풍부되라 탄되지로 지고래 탄되지로 마제바라 아니 마제바 아니 거의 편조라 차나 아니 코알라 탑미도 봐 거의 편조라잖아 코알이 깨지고 주주고는 마도 코알라 탑미도 봐 거의 편조라 차나 코알라 타다 미중와 다들 배라 가르래서나 배나 전바 정관에 탄대당 탑이 탑라 매바나 미시 정관을 내려나 아니 도마 정관들아 탄대길로 시켜고와 정가 탄대로는 아니 탑이 탈라 매바나 전바도 전라 미다와 대신도 정관을 미다와 대신도 라레니지 샤왕 젠지 아니 풍부마 코아텔라 타비 탈라 마데나 아니 코알라 타바기 뒤미 중심스 배저 맞잖아 벨라 탄도지 로제나 남신네 아니 코알라 가서를 타바기 탑광바라 때네 어느 코알라 타바지 연구를 탄도지나 남신네 남시 코알라 코완데라 타바시오 야
So here it says, now for us to escape from this cycle of life, we have to want to escape. So here when we are referring to samsara or cyclic existence, the cycle of life, this is referring to taking on of contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and affliction. So as long as we are taking up these contaminated aggregates, they are in the nature of suffering. So if we have to first identify what it is that is this cycle of life, taking on these contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and afflictions. And if we never develop that wish to escape from this, and we get attached to the good things of this circle of life, then there will never be any way to escape it. So if you don't give up the kind of craving and attachment for the things of this life, then you will continue to cycle through it, to take rebirth in this ocean of samsara. There will be no end, no limit to the births that one takes, meaning that we will continue to take up these contaminated aggregates that are in the nature of suffering due to our karma and mental afflictions. And so the example that is given to illustrate this is a prisoner can sit in a jail, but if he never really wants to escape and never really attempts an escape, he will never escape. So it's the same for us. If we don't sort of see our situation for what it is, if we don't understand that we are taking rebirths, taking up these contaminated aggregates due to the force of our karma and mental afflictions, we won't seek a way to get out of that situation. So it's the same for us. If we never try to find some way to escape this cyclic existence, the day of our escape will never arrive. But if we do contemplate this, if we do begin to think about it and generate a sort of mind wishing to be freed from the situation that we are in, wanting to get out of this ocean of samsara, then we will eventually be able to get out. There will surely come a time when we do escape from this.
Oh yeah, that day tabashi owns. That telling core could share gore, core country, Sena, share gore, Sajani Linji Pumbi, Tajung, Dunako, Jam Pumbo, Sajani Linji Pumbo de, Core, Pumbo, Pumbi, or de Disungota, Sajani Linji Pumbi, Ani, Yana Yandu Lambanese. 这些今年就对具体现在样都两把你跨了赢，跨了些把的个人在那，两年就往给就把今年就跨了两把的了跨完事，啥些年里不比军，样都两把你跨完赢了。 코와 대 강기 지나 세다 카르레 풍부 대 강기 징바레서나 줄량이 니 징바 레다니 뭐니 그러 코와 대 강기 징바레서나 량이 와 샤완도 주 풍부 대 강기 지나 량이 인지 징생 강도 지나 니는 풍부 징바인 또 니는 풍부 징바인 텔라 타바 제발라 니네 봉보자 동아 덴바스나 디레 코와스나 니 동아 덴바스나 사제니네 봉보데 뭐 대제지 그 주데 레다 니오데 군중 덴바스에 대니고 말에 레다 니모니 뭐 군중 덴바 가도 제나 니네 봉보 징바인 텔라 타바 제발라 당연라 코와다다 동아지 라신지 통고래 동아지 라신지 통네 교세당 아니 시안로 차보我就叫过그래 야
So here, where it's saying that we need to develop this wish to be freed from samsara, to develop this wish for renunciation, first we have to understand just how we spin around in cyclic existence, how it is that we are taking rebirth and what samsara is. So here, the cycle of life, or samsara, is defined as taking on again and again the impure aggregates that make up a normal suffering being. That's their own unbroken stream from life to life. So the taking up of these contaminated aggregates is samsara. This is what it is to cycle in samsara. And what is it that binds beings or chains us to this cycle? It's our own karma and mental afflictions. And so what exactly are we chained to, or what exactly are we bound to, is these impure aggregates that we are forced to take up due to the power of karma and the afflictive emotions. So in order to wish to be free from this cycle of samsara, we must first recognize that everything about it is, by nature, complete suffering. So recognizing first that taking up these contaminated aggregates leads to a situation that is complete suffering and is not passed beyond the nature of suffering. And then we investigate, well, what is it that causes us? What are the sort of causes and conditions that lead to this? And we identify that karma and our mental afflictions, so recognizing the truth of the origin of our suffering, is indispensable to then being able to give rise to a kind of disgust, a loathing for this situation, and bringing forth renunciation.
Oh yeah, then tell Taba Chabala, I know Kota Dungaji Rashin to Tonga Gures. Koala Tata Dungaji Rashin to Tone, I know Koi Joala, Joshadan, Shelo, on the Jun Tabo Gures, they give a Chabala and Kota Dungaji Rashin to Tonga. They do then you miss some Mabena. 타바트니 치시 미제베 세데들와 누덴 생각에 사제년이 풍부티 사제년이 풍부티 레 체제라 아니 동아지 라신레 아니 대위 코가 깨지게 잡매바데 아니 상로 땅에 가라 아니 다 동아라 미대바 제디 가라 아니 코라 조셔다 샹로 차보 제디 가라 아니 어 샹로 차보게 아니 코라니 와 집은 거지 좋고 그래
So in order to give rise to renunciation, we first have to recognize the suffering nature of this situation, that when we take up these contaminated aggregates, this is all in the nature of suffering. So as it said, if we don't contemplate the truth of suffering, then there's no way that we can give rise to a desire to be freed from cyclic existence. So it's necessary to first recognize the situation that we are in, recognize the kind of suffering that we endure, and that is what allows us to then bring forth this attitude of disgust, a loathing for that, a renunciation towards this. But in order for us to begin that, we have to first start by contemplating the suffering nature of taking on these contaminated aggregates.
세비 편조 간대지 있나요? 안에 동아지 라신. 가산 시와나 라르치모나 소만나 두된 삼비 고네 안에 세비 편조 간대지 있나라 안에 대라 샹로메 샹바로바기 샹로 나마치 마제나 안에 타바되니 되 실점들 로그레 소만나 세전에 세비 편조 탐자 간대지 있나요? 안에 동아치 쳐발라 대war자 마도 안에 동아지 라신라 마대바 텐지 삼니 아니 시비 편소 탐자 아니 가서 동아지 라신도 통하나 아니 테라 타바게 두바 인다 대두스도와 조세 샤롱 거지 저게 내주 남다지 메나 아니 시비 대와 천두니와기 아니 견역로에 또 두고 말해서 내주 대한 남다 가서 네, 누메나 근데 대니시에 탐매라 세대 어디 너주 남다지 메나 시바 코위 된데 전도니로 메도비 띵도 안에 텔라 깜바데 텔라 차바제베 차바제그레.
So then we need to be able to recognize that this is all in the nature of suffering. So from this perspective, we need to first think about the defects of the truth of suffering, as it says from the Lamrim Chenmo, that if one doesn't contemplate the sort of defects of this suffering situation that we are in, then there's no way that one can give rise to a mind of renunciation, of wanting to get freed from that. One first has to come to a recognition of the kind of suffering situation that one is in order to strive for something beyond that, to strive to get out of this situation. So here, thus, what the verse is saying is, without pure renunciation, there's no way to stop this attitude where one strives for whatever pleasant results one might get in life. So when one still sees the pleasures of samsara as being pleasurable, as being happy, hasn't yet come to recognize that all of this is still in the nature of suffering. Everything that comes about due to the force of contaminated karma and afflictive emotions is going to be in the nature of suffering. So until one has that kind of understanding, then one will still have this sort of craving for the pleasures of this life. So, moreover, it is precisely by the force of their feelings of attachment and craving for the pleasant things of life, and here they've translated it as hankering, but anyway, it is another name that we usually refer to as craving. I think craving is probably better, that all beings are fettered. So in order to recognize that we are in this situation, we first have to contemplate this suffering and then see that our craving, our striving after, desire for these things is what causes us to be bound within this cycle of existence. So if we want to escape that, the first thing we have to do is contemplate the suffering nature and give rise to this mind striving for liberation from that.
Oh yeah, that day. Sibala ne wa jume nge juji mena ani sibi tende tendo nyebagi lo de mido bitindu tando ani tela kamba de ani seba sheba ani desha ke me bare wa ani seba sebi minde se o sebi dewala ani seshen ge lo jewe wangi ani seshen ge lo je ti wangi lesa le ti wangi ani paja namshe ge tindu kawana tane ani yangshi chema lanyong ge jewa ge do shen ge lüjian nam jingyin na lüjian ma jingbare se o rang ji ji mi jing o rang ji ji mi jing de qingwa cheba na lanyong ge wangi qingwa cheba na 친제 코와라 타바 체바라 안에 토마 가르고아레스나 니주 남바 타바체타 고아레스.
So here it is this craving after the attachment to the pleasant things of this life that causes beings to be fettered, to be bound to this cycle of existence. So when we have these feelings of attachment or craving for the pleasant things of life, that causes us to then engage in karma. Karma leaves imprints on the stream of our mental consciousness, which ripen into effect in the future. And so this it starts a cycle, a causal cycle that keeps us bound in samsara. So here, this craving after the things of this life is what we have to turn away from. And it's that which is fettering or binding us. So if all beings are fettered, do you imagine that you are not? Of course you are. If you want someday to escape this cycle, seek then at the very first a pure attitude of renunciation. So from the beginning, it's essential to have this attitude of renunciation, of understanding what kind of cycle we are in and wishing to get out, to escape that cycle.
Oh yeah. Go away, Dila Jiu Chindung Lamdu, Satang, Jundela, and the Teddy Pinjola, and what you and what June, and then what Johnny, Simon Ondo Hamilton, the Ingachita. And the Coy Pinjola, and what June, and the Tabaton, the New what Jiu Chindung got the Tainza, and Dila Jiu Chindung Lamni, what they did not do, so Dila Chindung Lamdu. Gashi ke samla changja wala changju ke samma to ngejong gomba myogo wa samgan yue jang ngejong ni taba taba la ngewan go wa ma se ani taba tang taba la yang ngewa go wa ma se tian shu chabo go de go gre taba la shu chabo go gre ne jang go zongga wa chimbi somebody sharawa tar Sharawa Sumba Tar singular Taviche Kana Par Yamewa Shila Meduna Ane Koyu Kunjula Medu Tawatan Tetan Tavatani Tati Judaya Tati Juda.
So here then, this verse, by the way, incorporates what the works on the steps to Buddhahood refer to as the instructions for those of lesser and medium scope. So those of lesser scope or of small scope who are wishing to gain a good rebirth in their future, this is incorporated in this part of the verse, as well as the instruction for those of middling scope who are striving after their own individual liberation from samsara. So the trainings for those, or the instructions for those beings, are incorporated or condensed into this verse. And we see some people around with the notion that to reach enlightenment, you only need to practice the wish to achieve Buddhahood for all living beings, to have this attitude of bodhicitta, and that you don't need renunciation. They see this as being sort of like a lesser practice. But the truth is that even just to reach a lower nirvana, to reach one's own liberation from samsara, renunciation is an absolute necessity. In fact, it has to be fierce renunciation. So here there's a quote coming from Lama Tsongkhapa about the need for this kind of a fierce, extremely strong renunciation.
Oh yeah.
So we'll leave it there and pick up from there, but remember that it needs to be a fierce kind of a strong renunciation.
Oh yeah.